from wherever you are. My name is Nozugo Mpunzi, and I will be your moderator today on the conversation around recruiting the diaspora. So, just a few house rules. We are happy to have you here. So, it'd be great for you to just type in where you are joining us from so we get a sense of where everybody is situated. And please use the chat button at the bottom of your screen to engage with us, to chat with us, to share your thoughts on some of the questions that would be asked today, and to also just put in your questions as well that come up to your mind as we have this conversation. So without further ado, I think I would like to introduce our panel for today. So like I said, my name is Nozugo Mbunzi. I am from an organization called Advisory Culture, which is a consulting firm specializing in culture transformation, organizational transformation, as well as leadership enablement. And with me today, I'm very, very excited to have Philip and Ben here. So let me start alphabetical order. Let me start with Ben. So Ben here, if you can just introduce yourself, what you do in your organization, and maybe to start us off, give us your definition of what diaspora talent is and why it matters to you.
All right, trying to look the unmute button. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Cruz. I manage two work streams in Chevron. So I'm responsible for the recruiting work stream, and I'm also responsible for managing expats in and out of Angola. So my official title is Supervisor for Expat Administration and Talent Acquisition. And talent acquisition, basically, the old term for recruiting. Diaspora, well, I think, and I have a strong belief about this. It's definitely another source of talent, right? It's African talent that's spread around the globe, and similarly to the talent that we have internal in the countries in the continent, it's another platform for to complement this existing talent. Now, what is it that they bring? I think the biggest takeaway from this talent pool is really diversity, right? Diversity of ideas, different perspectives, knowledge, competencies, educational backgrounds that likely some of the universities in our continent doesn't necessarily offer yet. Experiences, work experiences. So yes, I think that is the definition of what the African diaspora is to me. It's another source of talent, another pool of talent that brings this diversity to the existing talent we have on the continent.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ben. And I guess Philip, to you, I pose the same question. Introduce yourself, what your role is at Chevron, and what diaspora talent means to you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. The name is Philip Sakwa. I'm the group head of HR or director of HR for C Squared. For those who do not know C Squared is a Pan-African infrastructure company, and we were spun out of Google about 87 years ago. And what we do is lay fiber networks within African countries. We are currently in about 6-7 countries around Africa. And what we do is we are a neutral carrier. We build and lease to MNOs, your big MTNs, and depending on wherever you are. So that we make the capital, you can say capex utilization very limited on those guys, and so the end user gets cheap internet. So what does diaspora talent means to me, or what is it? As I speak, actually, I'm one of those diaspora returnees. I started my career in the United Kingdom, and after a couple of years, I got a bit fidgety, and I started saying, "Can I actually work in Africa?" So, that for me, I define them in two types: those willing to repatriate home, or who are moved and interested to go back home or to come back home, but also those one who you can entice to be repatriated. Um, when I look at myself, I said, okay, what was the push to come back to Africa, come back home? And I think for me, I felt, I was, I'm well educated. I'd worked in very good organization within the United Kingdom, and I'd reached a point where I was, hitting the ceiling in terms of, being exposed. Yeah. And I said, I have a chance to go to Africa where I could see myself as a big fish in a small pond, because in England, I was a small fish in such a big pond. And so I wasn't recognized or seen. Of course, within my company, I was recognized. So, like Ben says, is that diaspora talent bring skills, already high skills. You're bound to know, okay, there are skills here in Africa, but the exposure that you get outside there is actually very, very useful to companies that are global, especially like multinationals that are working in different countries, or and have a touch of the Western influence. So that's for me. Is a thing that I always say, that skill that is transferable immediately to our continent. And also, I think in terms of the different exposure culturally, because sometimes we do tend to, as Africans, we work in our own countries. Okay, yes, now the global the things have changed, that we're now working in a global world. But in the diaspora, you find that you're working with so many diverse environments, like Ben just actually mentioned, both in terms of the people, but also the environment that you're working in. So tapping that kind of person, for me, is very, very useful.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Philip and Ben. Maybe before we get into the topic of the business case of diaspora talent, right? Maybe some thoughts around intra-Africa talent versus diaspora. So, Philip, you mentioned that you worked in the UK, but do we consider, let's say, somebody who come from Angola has a very special skill set, and that skill set is needed in Zambia, for example. What do we think that, like, what are the thoughts around intra-Africa talent versus diaspora? Are there overlaps? Is one better than the other? And when we speak diaspora, are we actually talking from the West back into the continent, or are we talking continent wide? Like, maybe some thoughts on that. Anyone can go.
Okay, since you mentioned my name, let me go first. I think it's such a very interesting topic there. What do you consider to be diaspora? Because where I sit in Nairobi, and we have quite a lot of Kenyans who, for example, live in South Africa. South Africa being considered the Western country of this continent. And we tend also to tap a lot from the people who are, say, for example, based in South Africa, who have been exposed there. So what does that mean in terms of diaspora? Do we consider that someone living in South Africa is not from the diaspora? In my view, it is actually a diaspora, because you're outside your country. And then, so in the years that I've been working, I work in the tech industry since I came back home. And within those years that I've worked in this part of the world, I found it very actually useful to tap within Africa itself, where you can get the talent, because there are two things that we have made it easier because it is closer to home in terms of culture, in terms of understanding norms and norms and traditions and etc. We might say yes, we are global, we are all exposed, but at the end of the day, there's something that governs us as a people, and that culture is very important. So that is one. Then the second thing is that you find the intercontinent movements are easy to manage because expectations are kind of closer to home in my experience. So, what is better? I don't think I can define that very well. And I don't like, well, for example, for me, when I came, of course, it was a struggle, and I think the struggle was again fitting in a culture. And that's why I'm saying I could even say that it's for me, it's better to get someone on the continent who is already culturally, understanding the norms and conditions of the continent than pulling me from London. And there I come with my big expectation and I struggle for the first couple of months or so. So for me, in terms of settling in, it's easier to move between countries on the continent.
Sure. And your thoughts, Ben?
I align with some of the thoughts that Philip just laid out. I think the traditional perspective of what diaspora is, you're thinking about your country citizens located somewhere else, whether that's you know outside of Angola or outside of Zambia. Basically they are overseas compared to what their home location is. Although we tend to look at it at more broader lenses, we really think of more from a continental basis, as you said it. So anybody that's out of Africa. As when I think about it, as human resource professionals, we have to be bold and we have to instill that boldness into our business leaders, right? We have to challenge them and ourselves in our perspectives and approaches to sourcing. Why do I say that? For some of the reasons Philip just said. Imagine you are, let's scenario play. So we have in discoveries of energy sources, let's say in Namibia, oil and gas sources. You have experienced folks in Angola for the amount of years that we have been dealing with this type of products. We have in the Congos, we have in Nigeria, and all across the world. So when you put in perspective, likely to source an expatriate from one of these locations compared to sourcing from a U.S. citizen or UK citizen, not only becomes cheaper, so whatever the nice term we can use to say cheaper, but culturally it makes the integration a lot easier. And at the same time, we start bringing value to the continent because we start not just upskilling the folks from that home country that do lack the expertise for not having to deal with that energy source, but ourselves, because now we understand that we have the skills that we need to produce, oil and gas and all the derivatives with internal quote unquote continental talent. So for me, it's I don't know how we are in that space. I haven't seen any research or any studies in that space. And I would say that is an opportunity that most likely we all have as Africans, not only in an HR professional, not only in the sense of challenging our own biases and ways of seeing the business, but also in challenging our business leaders when they are they are struggling to find talent. And first thing that comes to mind is the West. So I think those will be my comments in regards to that.
Great, thanks, Ben. Really good insights, especially that challenge I think you have laid to organizations and people in the profession of recruitment around when we think we are short of a skill. Immediate knee-jerk reaction is to go to the West, maybe overlooking the fact that some of the best talents or experts could very easily be right next door. And building on what you had said earlier, Ben, in terms of diversity, what Philip also started chatting about in terms of culture, easier integration potentially. Why is African talent in its entirety, and in terms of the diaspora, why is it so important to businesses operating on the continent, and what is the business case for hiring African talent in the diaspora? Ben, maybe let me start with you.
Yeah, I think both Philip and I touched on it briefly in our intros. I can summarize that into one word, and then we can expand. It's diversity, and I'm not saying diversity in terms of cultural, gender identity, all of those things. It's really diversity of thoughts, diversity of perspectives. We know that when we are, as human beings, if we have been exposed to only one reality for majority of our lives, that is the perspective we have most likely about things from that reality. And it doesn't matter how much exposure we have from external sources such as social media, TV. That is just one perspective, because you still have the on the ground, day to day living. So for anybody that's living overseas, necessarily they will develop different ways of saying things. And when you talk about people that have gone for studies, work, maybe just live and experience different things, the likelihood of that person returning to your home country, your home continent, the exact same way are very minor, right? So we know for a fact that, and Philip, you've been in the UK. I'm a recent returnee from the US, been there on assignment for 3 years, 2019 to 2021. And I certainly see things in very different lenses, at least some of them. So for me, the value is in the diversity of skills, competencies, knowledge, perspectives of life, and how to do work uh, based on that international experience, right? And those elements do challenge ourselves here, right? Because we tend to, there's a natural tendency for humans to group think. And sometimes you need that external um, push to develop new ways of thinking. Um, and culturally, this is not across the board, and definitely not in every African countries. But culturally, we tend to be very respectful of, hierarchy, age, and stuff like that. And sometimes we need uh, those folks coming from abroad, and a little bit more assertive, to shake things a little bit, if you will. So I'll summarize in diversity. I'll stop there, and Philip, go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think diversity in its entirety is very true. And I just look at one point. For example, most of the organizations, that the big companies that are big recruiters in Africa nowadays, are multinationals, and unfortunately, or fortunate, or unfortunately, I would say, they're seated in the West. Let's say, for example, my company, the mother company is Google, seated in California. So whether I'm operating in Kenya, Liberia, or Ghana, the culture kind of thing that I live is actually a Google culture that is based in California. So for me, getting someone, for example, from the US, who is willing to come back in Africa to work in under this company, I'm kind of assured that that person will have that thinking of global perspective in terms of what my organization, mother organization, is expecting from me. So that's one. We tend to follow what the mother companies tell us, or try to kind of mimic what they live. But the other most important thing is that, like, I think this stems on the culture side. The exposure that someone has gone out there and come back is very, very great and useful in our companies, because you tend away from now we have the millennials, and I think generations G what that is coming through, we tend to question the status quo and challenge the organizations. It's no longer, oh, yes, yes, mother, yes, 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 this. And I always tell the people that look at your children, for example, the children that are going into the mainstream schools and those that are going into what they call international schools are very different. Is because the way you are made to think or to react or to do, and those some of unfortunately those soft small things do matter in the organization. So the diversity of me questioning someone and said, okay, yeah, I know you're the authority, but what have you done, ABCD? So I found that is a value add for us as an African population or an African countries, whereby we get those kind of different skills. And on I wouldn't say that that doesn't happen in Africa between countries or whatever. It does happen, but it comes quite a lot from the West. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing also what I need to drop here is what now I call borderless employees. You find that people who have a mindset that, okay, I've gone outside there, I've seen it, I can work anywhere. So you find that the talent that you're picking away from the diaspora has that mindset, okay, I can actually be borderless, I can work from anywhere. Yet when you look at someone who is already established and everything, it's very difficult to push to uproot them out of their comfort zone. So I think that for me will say it's something that I always think about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you
And
for sharing that. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes,
if
Ben.
allow me just two quick points. One, I just want to concur with one of the things that Philip said around the corporate culture, for multinational companies, and that's the strategy around sending local employees overseas to develop. It's not only on the skill set, but also on the behaviors and mentality. So that challenging aspect, you go there, you learn how things are, and you come back and you can challenge the status quo a little bit more based on what you've learned and seen from those locations. The other element that I think I don't recall both myself or Philip having touching on it is technology, right? Technology and innovation. Now we are, as a continent, we are making great strides and we are picking up pace really quickly. Uh, but we have to be honest with ourselves that things get developed much quicker yet overseas, in the West, if you will. And you naturally will be exposed to those new technologies and ways of innovating much quicker than if you were here in Africa. So those folks also bring that, and that is a value add for businesses in country in our continent.
Great. So I hear around the case for diversity. I hear the case of like the dual culture. So it's that bringing that corporate or the mother body culture from the West, but also because of just being an African, might have easier time integrating into the culture on the continent, whichever country one lands in, right? And that diversity. I'm thinking in terms of being a little bit more challenging because of the exposure they've had. But I want to get into the nitty gritty of the business case. And when I say business case, we're now talking about the cost of this African diaspora, right? A little bit earlier, Ben Hur, you actually mentioned that intra Africa talent is likely to cost less than talent from the West. So if we are trying to attract people who have come from the West, Africans who are coming back onto the continent versus Africans that are in the continent that might be looking for opportunities elsewhere. So, for example, we know that the cost of labor in Kenya is lower than the cost of labor in South Africa. What's the business case then for diaspora talent? Does it bring back the value that you have put in?
It is not as like to. I think a lot of that it's target, if you will, an aspirational. Yeah, it's an aspiration. As an HR professional and as an African man myself, I would like to see that happen more. Just putting that out there. And the reason it is a challenge is because of the reality of employment in our countries. I don't know statistics from across the world or from across Africa, but I dare to say that we live in a constant, slack market where jobs are scarce, and a lot of our countries have policies stated by the governments around nationalization rates, right? And those nationalization rates are really locals versus non-locals. It doesn't matter whether Africans or Americans or UK. It's whether it's a Kenyan citizen and an Angolan citizen or South African citizen or Mozambique citizen. And for that reason, it's just the prospect of expats employees in general. It's something that doesn't necessarily sits well with our governments because the understanding is that they're taking jobs away from nationals, right? It's rarely seen as adding technical value, technology perspectives, etc. It's rarely seen in those terms. And of course, there is an important cost element, as you mentioned. Any expat will necessarily be more costly than the local employee because there are certain benefits associated with expatriation. It's just normal. Now, if you're looking at both realities, bringing somebody from outside of the continent versus bringing somebody from inside the continent, there are a couple of things that we need to look at. For example, if I'm looking under the lenses of an expat and the type of job that we have, you may look at whether we are offering rotational jobs or resident type of expatriate assignments, right? So residents, they stay in country, they stay in there. Rotation, they're doing the different type of rotation that, for example, oil industry and other industries offer, 21, 28, whatever that is. In those cases, it definitely seems that there is a cost benefit to hiring within the continent. There are also logistical elements that comes into play. We, as African, we have a lot of agreements inter-countries that enable work visas or entry visas much quicker. So just from the need that you identify, and once you identify your prospect candidate in an African country, there's a lot of benefits cost-wise, logistic-wise, from talent identification to onboarding. There's a lot of benefit. Peter already mentioned about the cultural aspects. Um, However, it is not easy because for any nation in Africa, most of the nations in Africa, they have these nationalization policies that are put in place for good reasons. It's really to promote employment, right? It's not the other way around. But at the same time, it may hinder some, you know, like we said, I'll keep it simple, diversity of thoughts, because expats do add something. It's not the best of,
Yeah.
but do add something to the local workforce, just like local workforce adds something to expats. So the challenge really becomes about making it visible to not only the corporations, the benefits of sourcing in the continent. And there are benefits from an economical standpoint, as well as integration, as well as diversity, but also complying with those governmental laws
Yeah.
that forces you as a company to meet certain thresholds of national
Yeah.
versus expats. I don't know if I touched on your
Yeah.
question, but that's
Yeah.
what I was like.
Yes, 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 you have. And Philip, do you have anything to add in terms of that business case?
Yeah, so around the business case, I always say that when you upload someone from the diaspora, you're bringing already you're bringing someone who is already skilled. Let's just say that's the norm. So in terms of cost benefits, you have reduced your cost on upscaling. That's what I would say, that okay, immediately your cost goes down in terms of long term, because this person tends to be highly skilled and highly capable of doing multiple roles within the organization. So you look at, yes, short term the cost might be high, but in terms of high, long term, the cost is spread, and it comes, the return on investments becomes very positive. And when you look at all the aspects that Ben and I have spoken about in terms of what the diaspora talent brings, definitely it makes a very high, business case in terms of bringing the diaspora back to the continent, or within the continent. I think the other what I'll say, I always try to think when I talk about diaspora talent and bringing them back home in terms of business case. I always build it in two ways. There is a diaspora talent that is willing and already ready to come back, and they've been looking, and the chance for you to find them is very quick, because yeah, I've been looking to going back home. So any opportunity, not any, but I'm willing to take. And then there's the other sideways. There is a talent that is out there, is very comfortable where they are, but you need them and you approach them. So for the cost of those two can be very different. Yet you are bringing them to do exactly kind of the same thing. So I always find it very cheap, it's very quick and cheaper to bring someone who is already willing to come back home, and because they are already probably even started setting up their movements back in Africa. But one of the things that I've been advising my people, or my business or leaders, is that coming from the diaspora, you come with a lot of expectations, a lot, and some of them are very unrealistic. So, like you say, like I think Ben just mentioned it as he was closing, that diaspora expert, is it really an expert? Because you can actually find that someone locally or somewhere within can actually do exactly the same thing. So the policy that organizations like Google have taken is that you offer package, and you say, Nozuko, you are South African, but I'm going to give you a job in Nairobi or a job in Lagos, but I'll pay you the package as per any person who is seated in that role in California, whatever it is. But of course, you take all the local aspects in place. So in terms of cost element, that for me, in my view and with experience, it actually works out much better because I've already made you understand that you're going to be seated in Nigeria and Kenya with this package. And for you as a returnee or as a talent, you have to think and you say, okay, what are my expectations? You work around the expectations that you are going to within you as a person vis-a-vis the organization, what they can offer. I've moved away and I'm trying to make a sense to most of my business leaders that it is not always the fact that you have to bring an expatriate. You understand in all that, because at the end of the day, what is the definition of an expatriate? You know, is it white and blonde? That is what I'm sorry to use that as an analogy, but that was always the fact that okay, someone coming from the diaspora has to be white, has to be this or that, and then the locals can't say anything. No, I think that trend should be relooked at and redefined, but also making sure that when you're bringing someone from outside, make sure that both company and the person coming, the expectations are very clear, and you're said, especially around the cost element. So I believe, like, to summarize the thing is that depending on where the level or at what point in time the person is, the business case can be built around the areas that we have talked about in terms of what is a talent, a diaspora talent, and you build it according to those two types of diaspora returnees.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Philip. And you've actually just touched on something that I want to go a little bit deeper in. We have now spoken about the business case for businesses to have diverse talent coming back into the continent to augment the capability and capacity needs that the businesses have on this continent. Now, if I am a candidate or a prospective returnee, what do you think could be important, or what have you seen as being for me to make that final decision to be like, okay, I am packing up my bags and I'm going to Angola. Maybe another way to ask this is like, what role do you think a well thought out employee value proposition plays in this conversation? And maybe I see Ben is smiling, Ben Hur is smiling. Maybe you guys can share from your perspective, Philip, at C Squared, and yours, Ben Hur, from Chevron. Like, what are the things you have done to make sure that working back on the continent is enticing?
Oh wow! I think
Big question. Big
no,
question.
I think Ben and I are both laughing or smiling because being coming out from the diaspora and coming home, there are some reality checks you have to go through. So I don't know where to start as a candidate because I've been both, but
Some
was
to the
another-
candidates.
yeah, I think for me as a person, what made me come back home, I think I mentioned about the reality of whether I wanted more exposure. I'm more. I think, fun enough, yes, I wanted exposure. Having worked in London for a long time, I wanted to do something different. I'd been seconded to go to US, whatever it is, Europe, but I wanted that perspective of learning first my culture, but also some things challenging me. But what made me come back home, and home for me is Kenya and Uganda because I'm dual from there. I looked at, can I actually live in that country? Socio-economic, political aspect of it. I don't care how many millions or thousands of dollars you're going to give me. You definitely cannot uproot me from a comfortable politically stable environment to go and be shot somewhere in Somalia. Sorry to use that, and if anyone is from Somalia, I'm so sorry about that. So that for me played a very, very big, important social, economic, political situation in the country that I'm going to go to. And then what are of course, with that comes all the other aspects. What are the career opportunities? You look at, how many global companies are there? What is the banking system? etc, etc, schools, blah, blah, blah. So that for me is from as a candidate perspective. The other thing that I did for me now that moves back to an employer, I'm using that is exactly to entice people to come. So I'm like, for example, when I'm recruiting someone from the diaspora, and I've just done that recently because we just opened up an office in Togo, Lome in Togo, and as you can imagine, we are in a technical, very high skilled technical world, and the resources are not as available as. So I had to go as far as else within the countries around, but also as far as France and Canada, because that's where they all come from. And I just have to paint the picture as is, be realistic. You understand? You don't have to paint the picture and say, oh, entice someone, and the reality on the ground is definitely different. So, as an organization, what are the value proposition you're putting on the table? Please make it very, very transparent, making sure that the person who is coming knows the reality of where they're coming to.
Yeah.
The second thing is that trying to ensure that they are up to date with the economic situation within the country that the person is coming in for. So what I usually do is if I am doing like a pull out, which is like, I'm pointing someone, I want you out, I do give them a buddy. For example, someone who has success stories, someone who have moved from a different country and they've come to work in Africa, and there's a success story about that. How did they do? How did they go? So for me, I take away my HR cap and I give it to, say, Ben, who is working the organization in a different angle, but he's also a returnist. So they share the success stories there. And then the knowledge, ensuring that the knowledge, local knowledge, culture norm sets, everything that is you might be you're born and bred probably in France, but you're Togolese. How much do you know about Togo? So ensuring that the person is can at least get up to that level of understanding where they're coming to, and aligning them to the reality of the local culture that they're going to work in. So ways of working, what kind of ways of working, what kind of culture away from just the organization. Someone on the group, sorry, on the chat mentioned about global companies bringing their culture and policies and enforcing them within local countries. It's a balance act because, like, for example, as I said, we are Googlers. We behave like Googlers, but we are not Google. But how does that work as a Googler within a country where you have to wear hijabs and you go to the office to look at a certain style? In the environment we work in, we don't have to wear a tie to feel important to deliver. So we are so laid back, and in some countries, for example, in the French the French-speaking African society, I have to be smart. I have to be the boss. My door has to be closed. You have to knock. So trying to understand all that aspect. If you're bringing someone from abroad and they say, okay, we're bringing them, and this is how it's going to be. I'm very sure this really will help you to position someone both within the company, but also as an individual coming back.
Yeah. Ben, your views. I saw a lot of smiling when I asked the question. Like, what's in it?
Because it's tough, and we have to be honest with ourselves, right? So when you ask that question, what would bring one African back to the continent? one has to ask themselves first, I think, what is it that drove them to leave the continent in the first place, right? So, what
Mhm.
are the motivations for doing that? And it's hard because everybody will have a different reason. Some people will go for educational reasons. Some people will be going to look for better economical, social economical conditions. Improving their own lives. And I guess what's at the core of everything is what Philip said at the very beginning. You start from the assumption that despite the reason, we all want to return. So
Mm.
you start from that assumption. Now, I want to before going to the EVP, how we can attract them. Maybe some of my thoughts about what uh, are some of the things that they may be looking for. So, the question around the challenges for us as employers to recruit them. One is really to yield the interest, right? The position that we advertise externally, and it's just yielding interest. So that's more of a tactical component of it. So what means do we use to make those jobs visible to this workforce, right? So you will do LinkedIn, you may reach out to universities and having them posting on their boards, etc. So just the tactical element of making those positions available to this workforce, it's not as straightforward as we would like to. Obviously, LinkedIn seems to be the biggest channel right now,
Mhm.
but there's still a lot of people that don't necessarily trust the positions in LinkedIn, but it's just a little bit of a tactical element there on that challenge. The other thing, and I want to touch this with one of the comments in the chat, it's aligning candidates' expectations, compensation expectation to those of the company, right? Generally, and this may apply for both type of candidates, both experienced as well as fresh graduate, but mostly for experienced candidates because a few things happen to this candidate. They might have experience in the continent, in the country from where they are from. They may have left for a specific reason, or they have that local experience and that overseas experience. Now they are highly valuable because of that, because they have the local perspective and the overseas perspective. And because they have experienced the local market, they generally have a solid understanding of the compensation structure in the market, the strongest companies, and generally what expatriate employees from outside of the continent usually get. Now, some of that may be assumption based, but generally it's information that people end up knowing. So when you have those candidates that have left the country or they bring a lot of experience, you can expect some demands, quote and unquote, similar to expat-like benefits. Now, obviously, if I'm going to recruit Peter to Angola, I'm going to give him expat-like benefits because he's going to be an expat in Angola. Simple. And if I'm going to pick another Angolan that's overseas, at the moment that he arrives, he's not an expat, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So how can I make a package attractive enough? Back to Peter's point and to the comment on the chat. How can I make a package attractive enough to, incite this candidate? That's the question. But then it becomes a little bit on your ability as a recruiter, right? So you have to understand what that candidate is looking for. So most likely, you know, it's that doesn't want to come to a job that's going to be, boring. He wants to see some challenges. Is likely looking for a good health insurance. Is likely looking for flexible work. Maybe if you have a rotational position, will benefit more because they may leave the family where they are and you can do rotational schedule. Maybe if your flexible work allows some days away from the office or whatever the work location may be. So those are some of the things. The other thing that is a challenge is the competition because these companies are highly attractive for any other company similar to your own. So most likely, if you're interested in them, more companies are interested in them. And the other thing that's a challenge is retaining, right? Retaining these candidates. Once you manage to get them in, and mainly if you identify the potential they have, you really have to be intentional about their development and onboarding and giving them enough challenges so that they don't get, you know, dissatisfied with the job and just leave or get hired by
Yeah.
somebody. So I think some of the challenges that we have are those. Sometimes it's also it takes long to onboard them. You know, once they
Yeah.
offer with those pre-hires checks and all of those things, it may take a while. Um,
Yeah.
Now, you know, the employee value proposition, I'll say, Peter said, be realistic. I'll say, stick to your guns as a company.
Mm-hmm.
Stick to your guns.
Mm-hmm.
So in Chevron, we say we want to be the company most admired for its people, partnership, and performance, and we strive to doing that. In Chevron, we say we
Mm-hmm.
have a set of values that we live for, higher
Mm-hmm.
performance, trust, diversity, protecting people and environment, and all of those things. And we strive for that. That's a
Mm-hmm.
culture that we strive for, and we really try to do the best in those space. In Chevron, we say we have a competitive benefits package, and we do offer you a competitive benefits package from our perspective because we benchmark ourselves against the market.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, you know, you will add a few additional elements because you really are interested in that candidate. You will make the job appealing because the
Mm-hmm.
job will be appealing.
Yeah.
You will bring non-cash benefits to your EVPs,
Mm-hmm.
things such as career development, career progression,
Mm-hmm.
how we develop people in general. So all
Yeah.
of those things will be critical to attract that candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but if to say that it's easy, definitely it is not. On these days, even more.
Yeah.
You guys may recall, you know, we had. I'll use the energy, oil and gas industry as an example.
Yeah.
We are cyclical industry, right? So we have moments of very good times and sometimes we go down. So 2010, 2014,
Mm.
2007, all of us remember those years.
Yeah.
What happened with those cycles is that when things were going well, we attract a lot of people, both expats as well as returnees. But when we had moments of crisis in the industry, a lot of folks left.
Sure.
Um, and it's becoming more and more difficult to
Mm.
bring them back. And in general, we rely on companies such as yourselves and others similars to help us
Mm.
identify and brand Africa as a good place to work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yes, Philip.
Yeah, to add something on a challenge, I think for me, the biggest challenge and hindrance in terms of bringing talent in Africa is governments and local labor laws. I see Nicole on the chat. She's mentioning something about understanding the labor laws. Uh, I remember working. I was trying to. We opened up an office when I was working in Ericsson in Rwanda, and talent there at that point in time, especially speaking English, was very, 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 difficult to come about. So
Mm.
we had to look outside, and it was a challenge to bringing people back home because of government policies,
Mm.
etc. So what we did as employers, we started lobbying the government in terms of making it easier for returnees to come back home and work. Yeah. So, and I have to say that our voice was heard. Rwanda is one of those countries that, were, as a diaspora, you actually received the transition back home is so seamless.
Mm.
Coming back, they have so many, enticing policies, for you to come. The waivers here and there. So it is so easy for example, to bring someone like that. Then when
Mm.
you come to other countries, say for example in francophone countries, unfortunately it's the opposite. I mean, it's the opposite because it's so challenging to even bring someone who is not holding a passport that is
Mm.
local, but they're actually born probably, say, let's say, for argument's sake, DRC or Togo, but because they've now changed their nationality
Yeah.
somehow, somewhere, to repatriate them. I'm telling you, it is so difficult. And I
Sure.
mean, you tell the government, this is someone who is willing to bring the skills home, to come
Mm.
and yes, they did, say at the moment I'm not going to be this nationality. I'm doing this because that's where they've lived for the last 20 or so years. But now they're willing to come back and they're recognizing the fact that they need to come back. So you
Mm.
find that struggle,
Mm.
unfortunately, makes it so difficult to even bring the willing Diaspora talent. So
Yeah.
I don't know how whether Ben has experienced it, but in my world, unfortunately, I go and I pull my hair out, which I don't have, just to try to make people understand that this is actually doable. This is benefit for us as Africans, us as countries. And it's so funny because you find that if it is a non-African, it will be so quick to
Mm.
actually kind of, you
Yeah.
know, so that mentality, and for me, I call it inferior's thinking of African
Yeah.
governments.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has really made it a bit difficult in some countries to bring back the talent that we need.
So that in potential inferiority complex around what you had mentioned earlier around the understanding of what an expat is, or diaspora talent had been very much linked to the Western standards or the Western looks, versus people who look like you and me just trying to come home and bring back our value add. Thank you for bringing that up, Philip. And maybe as a final wrap up, um, quick one sentence. What do you think we as the human capital community can do to help um, bring talent back onto the continent? One sentence, one thought.
Intentionality.
Intentionality. Mm.
Yeah, I think we have to be very intentional about going out for that population. So I think intentionality summarizes it.
Yeah, great. And you, Philip? One sentence or word.
Break the norm, breaking the norm.
Yeah, yeah. Go against the grain.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Thank you, Philip and Ben-Hur, for that very engaging session and for just being so open to discussing what your views are on talent and recruiting in the diaspora, as well as sharing your experiences and how you have dealt with it. And I'd like to thank everybody that has joined us today. We are very, very appreciative. Please do note that even though the video is ending, or we're done with this broadcast, you're welcome to put in more questions in the chat, as well as any additional comments that have come up to your mind. We are so grateful for your time. We are so grateful for your engagement, and I am so excited that we are going to be more intentional, and we are going to go against the grain and really, really use African talent in all its glory, as we build the economies of this continent. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye
Thank you
bye.
for the invitation. Thank you for the questions and have a great day. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Very, very engaging. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.